This is the DJI Osmo Action 3, and to be honest, when it first came out, I wasn't that excited about it. But recently, DJI has released a firmware update which has added a bunch of new features to this camera. And that's why I want to test it out now. So that's what this video is about. I'm going to be putting it through its paces and seeing what it's capable of. So we come to this beautiful beach for sunset, but it is super windy. I almost wasn't going to fly the drone, but I decided it would actually be a good time to test the new Rocksteady Plus to see if it can actually stabilize while flying in this wind. On top of that, I'm also going to use the HDR mode so we can see how that looks in these conditions. And I just want to say I'm using the free well filter on the Osmo Action 3, and I've also got one here on the O3 Air unit. Now, you might think, what's the point of that? But on my other drone, for the second flight I took it out, a little rock came up, hit the lens of the camera and actually cracked it. So having this little UV filter over the Air unit camera is actually a really good idea. I think the HDR footage from the Action 3 is really impressive. You get this really nice color profile out of the camera, which doesn't require any color grading in post. And on top of that, you get really good retention of those shadows and highlights. And I think this is a really good setting to just use straight out of the box if you want minimal effort when editing your footage. The downside is you don't have manual control over shutter speed and stuff like that, which is why I would probably tend to use the 10-bit D-Cine-like color profile because I personally don't mind having more editing in post. Now, as far as the Rocksteady Plus, as you can see from this footage, it is really good. It was incredibly windy out there and the drone was definitely shaking around a bit, but the footage straight out of the camera is super smooth. It's lucky we've got this little landing takeoff post. I'm going to try another setting now where I'm going to do non-HDR so I can actually get manual control of the shutter speed. And this is how I would normally fly the drone, so it's going to be interesting to compare that to the HDR video as well. Now this is 4K in the 4:3 format with the 10-bit D-Cine-like color profile on. Now I like to use this format because it allows me to stretch out the footage and get a really wide field of view, and I can also apply a LUT and get this really nice cinematic color from the camera. So it just gives me a bit more control than using the HDR setting. So I have the 10-bit D-Cine-like on the left and the HDR on the right. Now that was a bit overexposed for the sun here on the 10-bit, but overall I think that I prefer the 10-bit D-Cine-like because it has a bit more of a natural look, but it is going to require a lot more work from your side in editing. So if you want easy to work with footage straight out of the box, then I would go with HDR. One of my favorite things to use an action camera for is doing time lapses. They're just really quick and easy to set up. So I was very keen to try out the Action 3 with a time lapse. So I decided to head to Lion's Head and do one from inside of a cave. So what I loved about using the Action 3 for shooting a time-lapse was it records video and raw files at the same time. So you can see in this video straight out of the camera, the highlights in the clouds were lost completely. So what I was able to do was bring all those raw files into Lightroom and bring down the highlights and bring up the shadows to get a much better exposed image. And this is really helpful because it's obviously better to have that video file straight out of the camera, but if you're in a really complex scene like this, to have the ability to edit the photos afterwards and get that perfect exposure is really helpful. And I really like this because on the GoPro you have the option of either recording the raw files or recording the video. So it's kind of one or the other, but with the Action 3 you can do both, so you're basically set no matter what happens. So it's my last day in Cape Town and I really want to get some shots with the Action 3 underwater. So I've come to Windmill Beach here. It's quite late, but I'm gonna do what I can. And you can see it is completely flat. I've never seen it like this before. And the water also looks pretty clear. So I'm pretty excited to go out there and just see what I can get. So for the setup, it's really simple. I've just attached the Osmo Action 3 on top of my underwater housing. And I'm gonna use my Sony a7S III in here. Not really a fair comparison, but I might compare the footage from both of them. So I'm back and that was an amazing swim. I cannot believe how warm it was. I think I was in there for like 20 minutes and I didn't get cold once. So I haven't looked at the footage yet, but I think I got some pretty cool shots. What I can say though is that changing the settings on the Action 3 was really easy. You could literally take it out of the water, use the touchscreen right away, and yeah, no problems, which I have had issues with in the past, so that's a really nice thing to note. So it's future me and I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that the footage was really cool. But the bad news is, when I was looking at it on my computer, the card just ejected, and ever since then it's been corrupted, and I've tried 3 or 4 different recovery softwares and none of them have been able to work. I did get a bit of the footage recovered, but it was super glitchy and looked terrible. So yeah, I mean, it happens, but it's sad. I do still have some very cool footage from the Sony a7S III, so I'll still play that in case you want to see it, but we're gonna have to say goodbye to the Action 3 footage, unfortunately. This is what I do to memory cards that fail on me. Take that as a warning, guys. Take that as a warning. After losing the underwater footage, I decided that I wanted to do some more shots with the Action 3 filming myself. So I brought my one wheel out here in the snowy landscape, and I'm going to test it out with this overcast sky and snowy conditions and see how it performs. Not great. To put it simply, the one wheel's not very happy. It's snowy, it's muddy. So instead, I'm just gonna do some flights with the Action 3 mounted on the Avatar, and we'll see what we get. I'm done flying now. I got a bunch of different test shots, so it's gonna be cool to check that out. In terms of flying the Action 3 on the Avatar actually does pretty well. I don't know if I would recommend it because it does reduce your total amount of power and mobility a lot. But if you're in a non-windy condition like this and you're not doing crazy maneuvers, then it performs pretty well. Anyways, let's see what we got. After reviewing the footage, you can see this first clip is with Rocksteady turned off, and you can see how jittery and bumpy it is actually straight out of the camera. Now this next shot is with Rocksteady turned on, and you can see it makes a massive difference. Now this is probably my favorite setting because while Rocksteady Plus does stabilize more, it does crop in as well. So this last clip is with Rocksteady Plus turned on as well, and you can see it's quite a lot smoother, but it's also cropped in a bit more, which means I would normally use just Rocksteady on its own because I like that wider field of view. But if it's super windy out there, then I would recommend using Rocksteady Plus instead. So here we have 10-bit D-Log on the left, normal color on the middle, and HDR on the right. Now HDR isn't going to make a massive difference in a scene like this, although you can see a bit more detail in the clouds and the shadows beneath the trees. But I think HDR is generally going to be better for a super bright scenario where there's a really bright sky and darker shadows. I think it's safe to say I'm really impressed with this camera. I love the new features that DJI have added, and I think it makes it a really good consideration when you're looking for a new action camera. If you're interested in buying the Action 3 or any of the drones or products I used in this video, you'll find links to the latest pricing for those in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this little showcase of the Osmo Action 3, and if you want to see a comparison between the Action 3 and the GoPro 11, then please subscribe so you'll get notified when I upload that video in the future. That's it from me, I'll see you in the next one, and if you want to watch another video from me, there'll be one on screen right now.